Welcome to this video on the calculation of the arc lengths of curves that are given by parameterization in the Euclidean plane. The basic idea of attack towards this problem is to start out with the standard calculus approach of using approximations of these curves using straight lines. Then we use the concept of the supremum of a set to rigorously define what the arc length of a curve means. This leads into the definition of rectifiability of a curve. Following on from that, we give a few results concerning the definition of the arc length of a curve and some results on the integration of vector valued functions that will then ultimately enable us to calculate very precisely the arc length of a curve whose parameterization is continuously differentiable, meaning that both its scalar components in the x direction and the y direction are continuously differentiable functions of the parameter, say t. So this formula that we actually build up to does not work for the general curve given by any arbitrary parameterization. It works for only a subclass of those curves that have well-defined arc lengths and whose parameterizations are continuously differentiable, not for others. With this introduction having been given, we now dive into the details of this video. We start with some preliminaries that will help us understand the concepts that arise later. The first definition that we provide is that of a dissection of an interval of the form AB. So this is a finite set containing points from the interval AB, and the only stipulation on the set is that the two endpoints that are A and B have to be contained in the set D itself. Here the set takes the form T0, T1 all the way up to Tn. T0 equals A, Tn equals B, and n is a natural number. Moreover, the set of all dissections of the interval AB is denoted by calligraphic D of AB. An add-on concept to the concept of a dissection of an interval is that of a refinement of a dissection. So if D and D prime are two dissections of AB, then D prime is said to be a refinement of D if D prime contains D. So in other words, D prime contains a finite number of points in the interval AB. It contains all the points that belong to D as well as possibly some additional points that are not in D but are in AB. So it is easy to understand where the concept of the word refinement comes from, because we are refining the partition of the interval AB using D prime. We now introduce the concept of the path length of a curve that has a particular parameterization. So the path length is an approximation to the arc length of a curve by dividing it up into a certain finite number of pieces, and then within each of those intervals we approximate the curve using straight lines. The final step is then to just add up the lengths of all these straight lines and call that our approximation of the arc length. This is obviously a very standard approach in calculus. You start with an approximation and then you make it better and better until you eventually get to the true value using something that is very similar to a limit, or in this case the supremum of a set. So consider the curve calligraphic C in R2, the Euclidean plane, which is given by the parametric equations R1 of t and R2 of t. So t is the parameter here and it takes values in the interval AB. So as we discussed, we can approximate the arc length of C by substituting the curves by straight lines in n different intervals that partition AB, and then adding the lengths of each of these straight lines. Now obviously the n different intervals do not need to be of equal size, and this is where dissections come in, because dissections allow us to partition an interval into unequal subintervals. So with this observation in mind, let D be a dissection of the interval AB. Obviously it takes on the form A equals T0, T1 all the way up to Tn, which equals B. Then we set the point P sub I equal to R of T sub I. So this generates n plus 1 different points on the curve, the first and last of which are the two endpoints of the curve. The arc length is then approximated by the expression sum as I goes from 1 to n of the lengths of the segments P sub I minus 1, P sub I. So the first term here will be the length of P sub 0, P sub 1, then we'll have the length of P sub 1, P sub 2, and so on all the way up to P sub n minus 1, P sub n. Now these lengths can be calculated using the concept of the norm of a vector. The norm essentially calculates the magnitude of the vector and is a concept which is first seen in linear algebra. So the length of the segment P sub I minus 1 P sub I is equal to the norm of the vector R of T sub I minus R of T sub I minus 1. And obviously we take the sum as I goes from 1 to n. Now using the Pythagorean theorem, we can calculate this norm as the square root of square of the x component added to the square of the y component. So the square of the x component is r1 of t sub I minus r1 of t sub I minus 1 all squared, and the square of the y component is r2 of t sub I minus r2 of t sub I minus 1 all squared. This final expression that we have arrived at is equal to the path length of the curve C with respect to the dissection D. Obviously, if we choose a different dissection D, then the path line that we calculate will be different, and hence we incorporate the dissection D into our notation of the path length to show the dependence on the dissection. This brings us to our first theorem, which says that if we refine a dissection and then calculate the path length, the resultant path length that we arrive at cannot be lesser than the original path length that we calculated. In other words, refinements increase the path length. So suppose D prime is a refinement of D, then this is a sufficient condition for calligraphic P of CD to be less than or equal to calligraphic P of C D prime. For the proof, it suffices to consider the condition in which D is a proper subset of D prime, because if D equals D prime, then there is nothing to prove, for the two path lengths are equal to each other. If D prime is a proper refinement of D, that means that D is contained in D prime, but D is not equal to D prime. Also, because of the wonderful tool of induction, it is only necessary to prove the case in which D prime has exactly one more point as compared to D. Because if D prime has an arbitrary m number of points more than D, then we just used induction by first proving the base case and then using the fact that adding an extra point increases the path length to complete the induction step. So hence we take D prime to be equal to D union Y, and here Y is chosen in the interval AB but is not in D. Also, without loss of generality, we can assume that for some index j between 1 and n, we have that Y lies in the open interval t sub j minus 1 to t sub j. The interval is open because obviously Y is not equal to any of the t sub I. So now we start our computations. We notice that the path length of C with respect to D equals the sum as I goes from 1 to n of the norm of r of t sub I minus r of t sub I minus 1. This in turn is equal to the sum over the indices I that are not equal to j of the norm of r of t sub I minus r of t sub I minus 1 plus the final term where the index is equal to j, that is the norm of r of t sub j minus r of t sub j minus 1. So here we are just singling out this particular interval that is contributed by the index j, and then we use the triangle inequality which applies to the norm in this interval from t sub j minus 1 to t sub j. Because y is a point that lies strictly inside this interval, we know that the norm of r of t sub j minus r of t sub j minus 1 is less than or equal to the norm of r of t sub j minus r of y plus the norm of r of y minus r of t sub j minus 1. And finally, this last expression that we've arrived at on the third line is equal to the path length of C with respect to D prime. The second definition that we present is that of rectifiability of a curve C. So if the set of path lengths of the curve C with respect to every dissection of the interval AB has an upper bound, then its supremum exists in R, and in this case the curve C is said to be rectifiable. The arc length of this curve C is then defined to be the supremum and we denote it by lambda of C. Now it is important to realize that by this definition of arc length, not every curve given by a parameterization actually does have a well-defined arc length, because it turns out that for some curve C, this set of path lengths is unbounded above, meaning we can always find a dissection D for which the path length is greater than every real number. As a simple example, we just take the parameter t to be in the interval 0 to 2 pi, and if we define the parameterization r of t by t comma t sine of 1 upon t for t not equal to 0 and r of t equal to the origin if t equals 0, then this parameterization is not rectifiable. The simplest explanation for this is that as you approach the origin, as t approaches 0, the frequency of this sine wave increases without bound. Hence, in a sense, it has infinite length. Our next theorem is called additivity of arc lengths. So it essentially states that if you have a curve C that is rectifiable and has a well-defined arc length, and if you split it into two not necessarily equal paths, then each of the two parts that you divided into are separately rectifiable, and the entire length of the curve C is equal to the sum of the lengths of the curves of each of the paths. So to phrase that more mathematically, suppose C is a rectifiable curve parameterized by R of t for t in the interval AB. Now fix C in the interval AB and define two curves C1 and C2. So C1 is the set of points R of t where t lies in AC, which is closed and bounded, and C2 is defined by the set of points R of t where t lies in the interval CB, again including the two endpoints. So then it follows that C1 and C2 are each rectifiable, and moreover lambda of C equals lambda of C1 plus lambda of C2. To conceptualize what this theorem is saying is very straightforward. Now we actually come to the proof of this theorem. To show that C1 and C2 are rectifiable, we show individually that the sets calligraphic P of C1 D1, where D1 ranges through the dissections of AC, and calligraphic P of C2 D2, where D2 ranges through the dissections of CB, are bounded above and hence have supremum in the set R. So with that goal in mind, let D1 and D2 be two arbitrary dissections of AC and CB respectively. We then set D to be equal to the union of D1 and D2. And now D, by the way it is defined, is a dissection of AB. It then follows that P of C1 D1 plus P of C2 D2 equals P of CD. This is very straightforward. And furthermore, since lambda of C is the supremum of the set P of CD, we have that P of CD is less than or equal to lambda of C. Now, we also note that P of C1 D1 and P of C2 D2 are both non-negative quantities. So hence it follows that P of Ci di is less than or equal to lambda of C for both I equal to 1 and 2. And now lambda of C is a fixed real number since we assume to start with that C is rectifiable, and hence it follows that the sets P of Ci di for I equal to 1 and 2 are both bounded above, and hence C1 and C2 are both rectifiable. This completes the first part of the proof. For the second half, which is the equality, we have to prove two different directions, which are two different inequalities. The first inequality is that lambda of C is greater than or equal to lambda of C1 plus lambda of C2, and the second is that lambda of C is less than or equal to lambda of C1 plus lambda of C2. For the first inequality, let D, D1 and D2 be as before. So D1 and D2 are chosen arbitrarily as dissections of AC and CB, and then D is taken to be the union of D1 and D2. It was then established that P of C1 D1 plus P of C2 D2 equals P of CD, which was less than or equal to lambda of C. We call this relation asterisk. Now, P of C1 D1 is less than or equal to lambda of C minus P of C2 D2, and this relation holds for every dissection D1 of the interval AC. So it follows that the supremum of the set P of C1 D1, which equals lambda of C1, is also bounded above by the quantity lambda of C minus P of C2 D2. Now, rearranging a second time, we have that P of C2 D2 is less than or equal to lambda of C minus lambda of C1. And this in turn implies that lambda of C2, which is the supremum of the set P of C2 D2, is less than or equal to lambda of C minus lambda of C1. This proves the first inequality, because we have that lambda of C is greater than or equal to the sum of lambda of C1 and lambda of C2. For the opposite direction, we now choose D to be an arbitrary dissection of AB. Using this arbitrary dissection of AB, we then proceed to define D1 and D2, not the other way around. To ensure that D contains the point C, we create a refinement of D called D prime, which equals the union of D with C. D may or may not contain C, but D prime definitely does. From here, we let D1 equal to the intersection of D prime with the interval AC. So D1 is the set of points in D prime that lie in AC, and obviously D prime contains A and C. Similarly, D2 is said to be equal to D prime intersect CB. So D2 contains the points in D prime and those that lie in CB at the same time. Now we notice that the sum, as I goes from 1 to 2, of lambda of Ci is greater than or equal to the sum as I goes from 1 to 2 of P of Ci di, by the very definition of the supremum of a set. This in turn equals P of C comma D prime, because d1 union d2 equals d prime. And from theorem 3, we know that this is bounded below by P of CD because refinements of dissections increase the arc length. Now, this inequality holds regardless of the choice of D, and since we know for a fact that C1 and C2 are each rectifiable, the sum as I goes from 1 to 2 of lambda of Ci is a fixed real number. Hence, it means that P of CD is less than or equal to the sum as I goes from 1 to 2 of lambda of Ci for every dissection D, and so lambda of C is less than or equal to lambda of C1 plus lambda of C2 by the definition of the supremum of a set. And this is the opposite direction that we sought to prove, hence completing the proof of the theorem as a whole. With theorem 6 having been proven, we are now in a position to give definition 7, which allows us to create a mapping of the parameter t to the arc length of the curve up till any point in its parameterization. So phrasing this mathematically, suppose C is given by the parameterization r of t equal to r1, r2 of t for t in the interval ab, and that C is rectifiable. Then by additivity, it follows that for every t in the interval ab, if we define the curve C sub t as the points r of u, where u lies in the interval at, then C sub t is rectifiable. This is due to theorem 6. So, if we define a mapping S from the interval ab to the non-negative reals by S of t equal to lambda of C sub t, then this is a well-defined function because for every t, the quantity lambda of C sub t exists in Rn. The map S is then referred to as the arc length function. In this interlude, we now build up to lemma 9, which provides a result called the triangle inequality of integration as applied to vector valued functions. This result will then be important in establishing the all-important connection between the rate of change of the arc length function and the rate of change of the parameterization t and its norm. In particular, those two quantities are equal to each other, and that ultimately allows us to calculate the arc length of a curve whose parameterization is continuously differentiable. We start with proposition 8, which says that if C in R2 is a constant vector and R from AB to R2 is a vector valued function on AB, which is regulated, then R can be integrated. And moreover, it follows that the dot product of C with the integral of R of t from A to B equals the integral from A to B of the scalar valued function represented by the dot product of C with R of t. In other words, just like in the integral of scalar valued functions, one can move a constant into the integral. Similarly, a constant vector can also be absorbed into an integral of a vector valued function. For the proof, let C have components C1 and C2. Then the dot product of C with the integral of R of t from A to B equals C1 C2 dot the integral from A to B of R1, R2 of t. This in turn equals C1 times the integral from A to B of R1 of t plus C2 times the integral from A to B of R2 of t. This follows from the definition of the integral of vector valued functions and the dot product. Now, using the results from the integration of scalar valued functions, we have that this equals the integral from A to B of C1 R1 plus C2 R2 of t. This result that we have used is called linearity of the integral. Finally, we notice that the function C1 R1 plus C2 R2 is nothing but the dot product of C with capital R. And this completes the proof of proposition 8. We can now prove lemma 9, the triangular inequality of integration, which says that if R from A to B to R2 is a vector valued function on AB whose components are integrable, then the norm of the integral from A to B of R of t is less than or equal to the integral from A to B of the norm of R of t. For the proof, we set the integral from A to B of R of t dt to be equal to the constant vector C. Now if C equals 0, then it is evident that the norm of the integral from A to B of R of t, which equals the norm of C, equals 0, and this must be less than or equal to the integral from A to B of the norm of R of t, because the norm of R of t is a non-negative quantity, and the integral of a non-negative quantity is always non-negative by the monotonicity property of the integral. On the other hand, if C is not 0, then the norm of C must be positive, and the norm of c squared must also be strictly positive. Now the norm of c squared equals c dotted with itself. So we can write this as c dot the integral from a to b of r of t dt. Now using proposition 8, we can absorb the constant vector c into the integral and write this as the integral from a to b of c dot r of t. Then using the monotonicity property of the integral, we have that this is bounded above by the integral from a to b of the magnitude of c dot r of t, because the magnitude of c dot r of t, or its absolute value, is always greater than or equal to c dot r of t. Then we bring in the Cauchy-Schwarz inequality, which says that this is bounded above by the integral from a to b of the norm of c times the norm of r of t. Finally, the norm of c is a positive quantity, which is also a scalar and can be factored out of the integral to give us the norm of c times the integral from a to b of the norm of r of t. Now, recalling that the norm of c is a positive quantity, we can divide both sides of the inequality by the norm of c, giving us that the norm of c, which equals the norm of the integral from a to b of r of t, is less than or equal to the integral from a to b of the norm of r of t. This completes the proof of lemma 9. At this point, we discuss theorem 10, which gives an upper bound on the arc length of curves that are rectifiable and whose parameterizations are continuously differentiable. So suppose r1 and r2 are two scalar valued functions on the interval ab into the reals and are also continuously differentiable. Then the curve C given by r equals r1 of t, r2 of t is rectifiable, and moreover, lambda of C is less than or equal to the integral from a to b of the norm of r prime of t. For the proof, let D be a dissection of AB, then the integral of the norm of r prime of t from a to b equals the sum as I goes from 1 to n of the integral from t sub I minus 1 to t sub I of the norm of r prime of t. This is by the additivity of the integral, and here t sub I stands for each of the elements of the dissection D. Now this quantity is bounded below using the triangular inequality of integration as applied to vector valued functions, namely lemma 9, by the quantity the sum as I goes from 1 to n of the norm of the integral from t sub I minus 1 to t sub I of r prime of t. Next, we use the fundamental theorem of calculus to write the integral as the difference r of t sub I minus r of t sub I minus 1. Finally, we recognize that this sum on the third line is equal to the path length of C with respect to D, the dissection that has been chosen. Moreover, this upper bound on the path length, namely the integral from a to b of the norm of r prime of t, holds true no matter what dissection D we chose. Therefore, it stands to reason that the integral is also an upper bound on lambda of C, which equals the supremum of the set of path lengths of C with respect to D. This completes the proof of theorem 10. Theorem 11 is an extension to theorem 10 in the sense that the inequality provided over there is now shown to be actually an equality. So this gives us a way of relating the arc length of a curve to the rate of change of the parameterization and its norm. So theorem 11, which is about the calculation of arc length and is the main result of this video, goes as follows. Let r1 and r2 be two scalar valued continuously differentiable functions on the interval ab. Then the curve C given by the parameterization r equal to r1 of t, r2 of t is rectifiable, and lambda of C is equal to the integral from a to b of the norm of r prime of t. Theorem 12 says that the rate of change of arc length is speed. Theorem 12 has importance because it gives us a way to prove theorem 11. So in a sense, theorem 11 is a corollary to theorem 12. And our reasoning will also follow in a very similar manner. We will state theorem 12 and then, assuming theorem 12 to be true for the time being, prove theorem 11. Once that is done, we will then proceed to prove theorem 12 to round out the argument perfectly. So again, we make the same assumptions as before. r1 and r2 are two scalar valued functions on the interval ab that are continuously differentiable, and the curve given by r equal to r1 of t, r2 of t is rectifiable for all t in ab, and moreover, s prime of t, which is the rate of change of arc length, is equal to the speed of the parameterization, which is the norm of r prime of t. Now, just as I said a few seconds ago, we will now use this theorem 12 to prove theorem 11. So now we see that lambda of C, using the earlier notation from the definition of the arc length function, equals lambda of C sub B, which equals S of B. In fact, this is equal to S of B minus S of A, but by the definition of S of A, we know that S of A equals 0. Now S of B can be written as the integral from A to B of S prime of t dt by the fundamental theorem of calculus. And if theorem 12 holds to be true, then we can replace S prime of t with the norm of R prime of t. And then that will complete the proof of theorem 11. Finally, to prove theorem 12 itself, we proceed as follows. We make the same assumptions as before. Then the norm of R prime of t is continuous, since R1 and R2 are continuously differentiable. And since the norm of R prime of t is continuous, it is regulated and hence it can be integrated. Now, if we choose t in AB and set f of t equal to the integral from a to t of the norm of R prime of u, then by the fundamental theorem of calculus, we can conclude that the derivative of f evaluated at t equals the norm of R prime of t. F can be thought of as a function that provides us with the area under the curve represented by the norm of R prime of u between the bounds a and t. Continuing with our proof, now we show that for all t in the half open interval ab, not including b, the inequality, the norm of R prime of t is less than or equal to the right limit as h approaches 0 of the quantity s of t plus h minus s of t all over h, which is the differential quotient of s evaluated at t. And this in turn is less than or equal to f prime of t. Also, we will show that for all t in the half open interval ab, that is not including a, the inequality, the norm of R prime of t is less than or equal to the left limit as h approaches 0 of the quantity s of t plus h minus s of t all over h, and this in turn is less than or equal to f prime of t. Now by the assumption on R, we know that R prime of t and its norm exist and is well defined for every t in the interval AB that includes a and b. Similarly, by the fundamental theorem of calculus, f prime of t is also well defined for every t in the interval AB, including both the endpoints. On the other hand, we don't know for a fact that S is differentiable at every point in the interval AB. To show this, we will show that the left derivative exists at every point in the interval, the right derivative exists at every point in the interval, and that these two derivatives are equal to each other. This will show that the function S is not only differentiable, but also that on the interval AB, we have the equality, the norm of R prime equals S prime, which equals F prime. So for the right limit, let us now consider h to be positive and small enough so that the quantities t and t plus h lie in the half open interval AB, not including b. We then use the principle that the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line to conclude that the norm of R of t plus h minus R of t, which represents the straight line connecting the points R of t and R of t plus h, is less than or equal to lambda of c sub t plus h minus lambda of c sub t, which represents the curved length between the points of the parameter t and t plus h. Finally, by the definition of the function s, we say that that is equal to s of t plus h minus s of t. Now theorem 10 allows us to make the claim that s of t plus h minus s of t is bounded above by the quantity the integral from t to t plus h of the norm of R prime of u. To make this connection more obvious, we define a new curve c sub t comma h by the set of points R of u as u lies in the interval t comma t plus h, including both endpoints. Then lambda of c sub t plus h is identical to the quantity s of t plus h minus s of t. At this point, theorem 10 can make an appearance because we know that the arc length of the curve c sub t comma h is bounded above by the integral of the speed of the parameterization between the two endpoints of the interval, namely t and t plus h. Therefore, we can state for a fact that s of t plus h minus s of t is less than or equal to the integral from t to t plus h of the norm of R prime of u. Furthermore, the integral from t to t plus h of the norm of R prime of u equals f of t plus h minus f of t by the definition of the function f. Also, since h is positive, we can divide through by h without having to reverse any of the inequality signs, and this gives us that the norm of r of t plus h minus r of t all over h is less than or equal to s of t plus h minus s of t all over h, which in turn is less than or equal to f of t plus h minus f of t all over h. R is differentiable on AB since R1 and R2 are. F is also differentiable on AB by the fundamental theorem of calculus. So the left and right derivatives of R and F at every point in AB agree. That means they are equal to each other. So now if we take the limit as h approaches 0 from the right hand side, and if we set s prime sub plus of t to be equal to the right derivative of s evaluated at t, namely the limit as h approaches 0 from the right of s of t plus h minus s of t all over h, then this gives us that the norm of r prime of t is less than or equal to the right derivative of s at t, which is less than or equal to f prime of t. Now we show a very similar inequality, but with the left derivative replacing the right derivative. So if we take h negative and mod h small enough, this gives us r of t minus r of t plus h. Now notice that t plus h is less than t because h is negative. We see that the norm of r of t minus r of t plus h is less than or equal to s of t minus s of t plus h. Again, using the principle that the shortest distance between any two points is the straight line connecting them. And this quantity is less than or equal to f of t minus f of t plus h, by very similar reasoning to the case where h was positive. Finally, we divide by negative h, which is a positive quantity, and we arrive at the earlier inequality, namely the norm of r of t plus h minus r of t all over h is less than or equal to s of t plus h minus s of t all over h. This in turn is less than or equal to f of t plus h minus f of t all over h. Finally, we realize that as h converges to 0 from the left, we have the norm of r prime of t is less than or equal to the left derivative of s at t, which is less than or equal to f prime of t. To denote the left derivative of s at t, we use the notation s prime sub minus of t, which is the left limit as h approaches 0 of s of t plus h minus s of t all over h. Next, combining the dual inequalities, namely the norm of r prime of t is less than or equal to the right derivative of s at t, which is less than or equal to f prime of t, and the norm of r prime of t is less than or equal to the left derivative of s at t, which is less than or equal to f prime of t. We deduce that for all t, the right derivative of s and the left derivative of s are equal to each other. And since it was shown earlier that the norm of r prime was equal to the norm of f prime on AB, that on AB we have the norm of r prime equals s prime, which equals f prime. This completes the proof, thereby giving us a means of calculating the arc length of a curve with a continuously differentiable parameterization using the speed of the parameterization. A very good and useful resource that can be used as reference material on the content discussed in this video is the book on real analysis by John M. Howie. It's a Springer publication, and it gives some nice detailed examples of curves that are not rectifiable, which will help you understand what rectifiability actually means, and it'll help to give you a clearer picture of everything that has been discussed. So with this discussion out of the way, now I sign out for now, and I hope to see you in a future video. Thank you for watching.